So I know quite a few of you missed the quiz last week, and if you did, it has to be made up by Thursday, and everything has to be turned in by Thursday today, or Thursday this week after school. Times that you can make things up. I'd be here today after school. Actually, I can do any day after school this week, Monday through Thursday. And then, I don't think I have any meetings except for Thursday morning. So you could do today after school, Tuesday, Wednesday before or after school, Thursday after school. Okay, but Thursday is the last day to turn in any homework or anything like that. And then some of you have, do many of you have next Friday? Or like, do any of you not have this class next Friday? Do you guys know, like if we look in Skyward? I'm curious if we have to return any books. So if you guys don't have regular Algebra 2 until the spring, which could be, then we'd have to return your books. So I'll, that's fine, then you can keep your book. Just make sure that you check on that. So you know if we have to return books at all. All right, so on Wednesday, if you missed, we reviewed all the types of factoring. Today, so Wednesday had a little bit of new stuff, but not much at all. Today, we're gonna do more of that. And you're gonna see that the way that this is different than the factoring we did back in chapter 2 is that the powers of your X in chapter 2, the highest it would ever have been is to the 3rd power. And in this section, it can be up to the 8th power. It could be to the 9th and higher than that even. But I think in this one, the problems we do, the highest it'll ever be is to the 8th power. So that's how this is different. So again, today, if you have 2 terms, what that means is you're gonna have like 2 things connected by a plus or minus sign. First thing you'd always do is factor out the greatest common factor. If it's difference of squares, there's a way that we would do that. So check if it's difference of squares first. If it's not difference of squares, it can be sum or difference of cubes, and we'll talk about that today. If it has 3 terms, we'd still want to factor out the greatest common factor. And then you take that and you use this box and this chart. If you guys have gotten to the point that you don't need to use these, you don't have to use them. I notice 1 or 2 of you don't use it, and that is absolutely fine. And then when you get to 4 or more terms, so today we'll have 6 terms. So you could have 6 terms here. You could even have 8 terms. The first thing you'd want to do is factor out the greatest common factor. And then you're going to do factor by grouping. And down here in pink, it says, if you have 4 terms, you're going to group them into 2 groups of 2. If you have 6 terms, you're going to group them into 2 groups of 3. And we'll see that as we go through today. So first of all, we're going to talk about what happens if we have difference of squares, okay? So in difference of squares, like say that I gave this. The first thing is it has to be connected by a minus sign. Your variables have to be even powers. So you could even have a y here. As long as both of these powers are even, you're fine. And then your numbers have to be perfect squares, and 4 and 9 are both perfect squares. You guys on that sheet, on that flow chart I gave you, you have this on the back of it, and it would just have to be one of these listed in red. Okay, so that is this right here. We don't do sum of squares, so you can ignore that. All right, so if we look right here, it says do difference of squares to factor the following. So the very first thing that you always want to do with this is look at, is there something you can factor out front? Is there something that's in both of these? And an X is in both, okay? So I can pull that X out. And then I look at X times what gives me X to the 5th. That's X to the 4th. Minus X times what gives me 16X, and that's 16. Okay, so now I took that X out front. Now what I'm going to do is look at, is this difference of squares? And remember, your power has to be even, and it is. Your sign has to be subtraction, and it is. And the number in front here, as well as the 16, has to be a perfect square, and 16 and 1 are both perfect squares. So I'm going to carry that X down. I can't just forget about that. And then when you do difference of squares, one sign is going to be plus, one's going to be minus. If it's X to the 4th, what you do is you put half of the X's here and half of the X's there. Half of 4 is 2, so you're going to have 2 on each of them. And then you think, what is the square root of 16? And that goes here and here. And the square root of 16 is 4. Okay. Now, when you have that higher power, what can happen is one of these can be factored more a lot of the times. Okay, so that's what you have to look for. This one has a plus sign, so we don't have to worry about it because it's not a difference of squares. But this one has a minus sign, so I have to check that. X squared, 2 is even, 4 is a perfect square. So I can take this last one and do difference of squares. So I have my X, I have X squared plus 4, and then I can take this and factor it. So with difference of squares, again, you're going to have a plus and a minus. If this is X squared, you put half of the X's here and half here, so 1 in each position. And then you take the square root of 4, which is 2 and 2. Now, the only thing you could take further is the minus 1. And this only has 1x. It's not to the 2nd power, so you can't do anything with that. Also, 2 is not a perfect square. So that is your answer. Okay. Now, if we look here, we have 2 terms. There's nothing I can take out front, so I don't have to worry about that. I do have a subtraction sign. 109. Here's 100. Here's 9. Okay. And then I have to have a even power, and 8 is even. So I am going to do difference of squares again. And then with difference of squares, remember we do plus and minus. For the m to the 8th, I put half of the m's here, which would be 4 of them, and half of the m's here, which would be 4. And then with that 100, I think what's the square root of 100? And the square root of 100 is 10. Square root of 100 is 10. And then with the 9, I put the square root of 9 in these other two places, and the square root of 9 is 3. The positive one you don't have to worry about. This one you do. But the fourth, that would work if the 10 and the 3 were perfect squares, and they're not. So that means we stop right here. Now, if we look at this one, again, there's nothing I can take out front. I have a subtraction sign. 8 is an even number. And 625, I bet those of you that weren't here on Wednesday, I forgot to give you your cheat sheet. And on your cheat sheet last week, we added this one to the perfect squares. 25 squared is 625, okay? So this is difference of squares. So that means I'm gonna go plus and minus. I put half of my x's here, which is x to the 4th, and half of them here. And then I take the square root of 625, which is 25, I put there and there, okay? The positive one I can't do any more with, but I have to check this one. This is to the 4th power, which is even, it's minus, and 25 is a perfect square, so I can take that one further. So I have x 4th plus 25, and then I have to factor this, okay? So when you factor it and it's difference of squares, you have a plus and a minus. You put half of the x's here, half here, and the square root of 25 is 5. You would still have to check this minus 1. 5 is not a perfect square, so I can't do anything else with that. So this is my answer. All right, so now if we look here, the second type of factoring that we know is sum or difference of cubes. So this one can be plus or minus with the cubes. If it's plus, you're going to use this formula. If it's minus, you're going to use this formula. And on your cheat sheet that you guys have, and again, if you were gone Friday or Wednesday, remind me because I have this for you. But with the sum or difference of cubes, the formula, if it's plus, is here. If it's minus, is here. Okay, so you don't have to memorize those. That would be on your cheat sheet. All right, for something to be sum or difference of cubes, you can have a plus or a minus. Your variables have to be multiples of 3. And I believe for us, it's either going to be 3 or 6. Your numbers have to be perfect cubes. And this perfect cubes is on the back of that flow chart cheat sheet. Okay. And then if it's difference of cubes, you'd have the minus sign and you'd use this formula. If it's a plus sign, you use that formula. So if we look at an example here, the way that you would look, it can be plus or minus. I have 2 variables here. They have to be to either the 3rd power or the 6th. And notice they're the 6th. And then you have 125 and 8. Here's 8, here's 25. They're both cubes. How I do these is I think, what cubed would give me this? Okay. For what cubed would give you 125, you can just look here. 5 cubed gives you 125, so I need a 5. Now this is a little bit confusing. You're thinking x to the what cubed would give you x to the 6th. Do you guys know what number would be here? What power of x cubed would give you x to the 6th? It would actually be 2. You would multiply those. So if this is 6, this is going to be x to the 2nd cubed. You'd multiply them. So this is going to be x squared. Okay. Then I think for my b, what cubed gives me 8? And that is right here. 2 cubed gives you 8. So you need a 2. And then again, you're thinking, y to what power cubed would give me y to the 6th? And that would be y squared. So this is y squared. Okay. Now how I do it is I write down the formula, and this one's subtraction. So I'd write this down. Okay. A minus b, I would write in the first thing, so that's just 5x squared minus 2y squared. Now what I would have to do is I'd have to take 5x squared and I'd have to square it for this, okay? 5 squared is 25. And again, we multiply these powers, so it'd be x to the 4th. Then for the middle, I multiply these two. 5 times 2 is 10. And then I'd have an x squared and a y squared. And then for the last thing, I'd have to square 2y squared. I have to square that. 2 squared is 4. And then I have y squared to the 2nd power. So I would multiply those. So I get y to the 4th. Okay. Now this right here would be our answer. They do get a little more confusing when you have the 6th power. Now this one here is plus, and notice a to the 6th with sum or difference of cubes, they can be to the 3rd or the 6th power. And 64 is here and 27 is here. So what I would do then is I'd say, what cubed would give me 64a to the 6th? 4 cubed would give me the 64. And remember, like a squared to the 3rd power is going to give you a to the 6th. So this is a squared. For b, you're thinking what cubed would give you 27, and 3 cubed would give you 27. So you need that 3. And then you're thinking b to what power cubed would give you b to the 6th, and that would be squared. Now, what I do is I always write down my formula, and this one is plus. So I'd write this down. So it'd be a plus b times a squared minus ab plus b squared. Okay. Now I have to add a and b. So it's 4a squared plus 3b squared. Now I'm going to square my a. So I'm going to square 4a squared. 4 squared is 16. A to the 2nd to the 2nd, you multiply, so that's a to the 4th. Then we're going to subtract a times b, which would be 12. A to the 2nd, b to the 2nd. 4 times 3 is 12, and then you have an a to the 2nd and a b to the 2nd. And then I have to go plus b squared. And b is 3b squared squared. 3 squared is 9. B to the 2nd squared would be b to the 4th. And that is your answer. Okay. And now if we look here, this is where we are going to use the box and this, and we're factoring. So this one's a little bit different in that every time we've had this, we've only done an x squared here and an x here, okay? So when you do one that has an x to the fourth, you know how when we typically put them in the boxes, we put an x with each of them? Here, you're gonna do an x squared with each of them. You always, when you have like x to the sixth, let's say, then you'd have three x's and three x's. Okay, so we're gonna have x squared with each of these. The negative 18 goes here, the negative 18 goes here, and then what's in front of the x squared, which in this case is a negative 7, goes there. Then you're gonna think, what factors of negative 18 give you negative 7? What would that be? Negative 9 times 2, okay. So what that means then is that one of these is gonna be negative 9, one of these is gonna be 2, but you have to put those x squareds with them. Now, when that happens, and you have x to the fourth, you're gonna put x squared here and here, okay? And then you're thinking, what times x squared gives me negative 9x squared? That's a negative 9. And x squared times what gives me 2x squared? That's a 2. So x squared minus 9 is going to be one of our things. And then here it's x squared plus 2. Okay. Now, I always have to check if either of these can be factored more. The plus one, you don't have to check. The minus one, I do. With this one, is this something we know? You recognize that? It's what? Isn't this difference of squares? Because it's squared, it has a minus sign, and 9 is a perfect square. So I have to do difference of squares with that first one. Difference of squares, you're always going to have a plus and a minus. That's x squared, an x and an x. And if this is 9, it's going to be 3 and 3. And then you still carry that other one down, even though that one can't be factored more. So that's your answer. If you were on the test and you got it this far, you're going to get points. But you wouldn't get the full credit. Okay. So if we look here, we have x to the fourth here. Then remember that says we have to have x squared here and here. And then we have a 14 here and here. And then they add up to a negative 9. Now, one of the things you have to remember when you're doing this is if you have a minus sign in the middle and a plus sign here with a trinomial, each of these is going to be minus. I do have that. Actually, maybe if this is on your cheat sheet, but if you ever have a minus sign here and a plus sign here, they're both going to be negative. And so when you look down here to get this, you're going to think of what are two negative numbers that give me a positive 14 that add up to a negative 9.
You have 7 and negative 2.
Yep, negative 7 times negative 2 is a positive 14. Negative 7 plus a negative 2 is negative 9. So I put a negative 7, a negative 2, and then when I'm deciding what these are, if this is x to the fourth, I do x squared and x squared. What times x squared gives me this is minus 7. What times x squared gives me this is negative 2. And you can always check, is -7 times -2 a positive 14? And it is. So one of my factors is x squared minus 7. One is x squared minus 2. When you decide, can you factor a more? You're going to think of difference of squares. 7 is not a perfect square. 2 is not a perfect square. So that means this is our answer. Okay. Now this one is x to the 6th. So that means this is going to be x to the 6th. This is going to be x to the 3rd. And this is going to be x to the 3rd. Okay. Then you want them to be -18. So I'm going to make this -18 and I want them to add up to -3. Can you think of two factors of -18 that add up to -3?
6 times.
Would you want, which,
Other way around.
the other way around? -6 times +3 is -18 and -6 plus 3 is -3. Very good. So -6 and 3. So now what I'm going to do, if this is x to the 6th, one's going to be x to the 3rd, one's going to be x to the 3rd. So you put half of them in each of those spots. And then what times x to the 3rd gives me? That is a 6. X to the 3rd times what gives me? This is a 3. And then I just go back over here and put that. So one is x to the 3rd minus 6. And one is x to the 3rd plus 3. Now, really with these, you could get something that would be summer difference of cubes. But if you looked at your perfect cubes part, 6 is not one of those perfect cubes and 3 is not. So we don't have to worry about taking these further. Okay. So now let's go to the last kind, and this is when we have factor by grouping. And on Friday, we did factor by grouping with 4 terms. And what we did is we took those 4 terms, we put 2 in one group, 2 in the other group. When you have 6 terms, you want 2 groups. So you do a group of 3 and a group of 3. With these, sometimes after you do factor by grouping, you can do another type of factoring, and that's what makes this a little bit more difficult. So if it's 2 terms, you check, is this difference of squares, sum of cubes, or difference of cubes? If it's 3 terms, then you would check if you could use the box. Now, you guys are always going to have kind of a hint, because I do put these when you need them. So if you see a box in this, that means you can factor the trinomial, the one with 3 terms more. Okay, so we are going to factor the first 3 and the second 3. When I do that second parenthesis, put it so that that minus sign is in front or is inside the parenthesis. Then I look at this first part and I think, what goes into all of these? And do you guys see that it's x squared goes into all of them? So I can take an x squared out front. And then I think x squared times what gives me x to the 4th? That's x squared. X squared times what gives me 7x to the 3rd? That's a 7 and an x. X squared times what gives me 10x squared? That's 10. Okay. Now I look at this. And honestly, whenever the first thing in my second parenthesis is negative, what I do is I kind of cheat and I put my common term here. Because I always know that this parenthesis and this parenthesis have to be the same. So then I would look at what would I have here so that that times x squared gives me -4x squared, and that would be -4. -4 times 7x is -28x, And -4 times 10 is -40. So that is correct. When you go to do your answer then, you can put either one of these first. I usually do my common first. So I'm going to go x squared plus 7x plus 10. And then what is in front of here and in front of there, I put together in a parenthesis. So it's x squared minus 4. Okay. Now, like I said, what happens in this a lot of the times is that you can factor a more. If you see this, that tells you you can factor a trinomial, and this is the trinomial I can factor, okay? So I would know I'd have an x squared here, the 10 would be here and here, and the 7 would be here. Can you guys think of two factors there that would multiply to give me 10 and add to give me 7?
5 and 2.
5 and 2, good. So this would be 5x, this would be 2x, okay? Now, x times x gives me x squared, 5 times x gives me 5x, x times 2 gives me 2x, and 5 times 2 gives me 10. So one of my factors is x plus 5, the other one is x plus 2. Okay, now I have this. Can I factor this more? Yeah, what is it?
X plus 4 twice 2.
Yes. This is difference of squares. So you're going to have a plus and a minus. If this is x squared, we do an x and an x. And if that is 4, we take the square root of it here and here. And so this is our answer then. Okay. Now let's look at this one. We have one more. So here again, we have 3 and 3 that we're going to factor together. Like this, okay? I look at that first one and I look at what can I take out front? And I can take an x squared out front. And then I think x squared times what gives me x to the 4th? That's x squared. X squared times what gives me 6x to the 3rd? That's 6x. X squared times what gives me 5x squared? That's 5. Again, if my first thing in these parentheses is negative, I generally bring and I copy this over, as I know those two have to be the same. And then I think what would go here? So 1 times x squared would give me a negative 9x squared, that's negative 9. Negative 9 times 6x is negative 54x. Negative 9 times 5 is negative 45. Then, because these two are identical, I bring that down. And then what's in front here and what's in front there, I put in a parenthesis. So that's x squared minus 9. Now, here I would have these, which should tell you I can factor that more. I'd have an x squared here, a 5 here, a 5 here, and a 6 there. What are two factors of 5 that add up to 6? 1 and 5, yep. So one of these would be 1x, one would be 5x. And then I can say the way I'd get x squared is x and x. What times x is 1x, that's 1. X times what is 5x, that's 5. So on top here, I put plus. Here I have plus. So I do x plus 1 times x plus 5. Can I factor this more? Yeah, this is difference of squares again. So it'd be x plus 3, x minus 3. Okay, and that would be your answer. So I will get you your worksheet. Or do you want to let me know, like, schools? Yeah. It's harder to come back after a break. Like, oh, this morning I did not. My tree is half decorated. I just wanted to swim and decorate my tree. Not that I don't like my job, but it's just.
Thank you.
Quite feel ready to be back.
So when you do, one